"You're unfit, idiot." The words hit harder than any gavel. Cameras flashed. The chamber gasped. 3 in 12 reporters turned their heads. The President of the United States clenched his fist. His blood pressure reportedly spiked to 176/98. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence screamed. She didn't blink. She smiled. Jasmine Crockett, civil rights attorney turned political scalpel. Approval rating last week, 38%. This morning, 91%. A folder lay open on the table. 3 birth certificates, 3 different states, 3 women, 86 million in hush money over 22 years. 1 DNA match, 99.6%. The president's name wasn't on a single document, but his fingerprints were all over the truth. And this was only the first 43 seconds. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded. The kind of silence that hums beneath the skin, the kind that suffocates before it explodes. Not a word was spoken, yet every heartbeat in the chamber was audible, a collective drum of anticipation and dread. The mahogany-paneled hearing room of the House Oversight Committee had hosted decades of scandal, but never had it smelled like this. Like cold sweat, like fear being politely contained behind designer suits and dry legalese. The doors creaked open. 2 Secret Service agents stepped in first. Then he followed. Donald J. Trump, 47th President of the United States, walked into the room like a shadow slipping through the light. No wave, no smirk, no deflection. Just a slow, deliberate walk to the lone chair at the center. A chair that looked too ordinary for the weight it now bore. He didn't look at anyone. Not at the cameras, not at the committee, not even at Jasmine Crockett, though her presence hit like a cold gust in a sealed room. She was already seated, back straight, palms flat on the polished oak table, a folder in front of her, matte black, unmarked except for a single label in white block letters, confidential, bloodline case. The camera found her eyes. They were still, unforgiving, not angry, something worse, controlled. Jasmine Crockett had built a reputation on fire, but today she brought ice. Trump sat. The creak of leather under him echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. His legal team flanked him, 4 deep, but their presence barely mattered. Today, it wasn't about the law. It was about the reckoning. Chairwoman Hernandez cleared her throat, but Jasmine raised a hand slightly. Permission wasn't needed. Everyone in the room, Republican, Democrat, press, staff, knew why they were really here. "Mr. President," Jasmine said, her voice clear, crisp, surgical. "Before we begin, I'd like to establish that this is not a criminal trial, nor a political ambush. This is a hearing on financial ethics, misuse of executive privilege, and undisclosed biological connections." Trump didn't respond. His eyes locked on the folder before her, unmoving. But his right hand twitched. Barely, like something in him wanted to run, but couldn't. Jasmine opened the file with the slow grace of a blade leaving its sheath. She didn't need to lift her voice. Every syllable was a scalpel. "Exhibit A," she began. "A wire transfer of $12.6 million made in June 2002 to a Canadian bank account held by Ms. Colleen Marks. The note reads, Consulting International Logistics. Ms. Marks was not employed. She was, however, the mother of a child born 7 months later in Toronto." She slid a printed copy forward. One of Trump's lawyers reached for it but hesitated, as if it burned. "Exhibit B, a non-disclosure agreement signed by one Mrs. Lacey Brennan, witnessed by an executive at Trump Tower, with a clause explicitly forbidding any discussion of paternity or identity of offspring. Payment amount, $38.5 million over 19 years. Gasps rippled across the back row. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Exhibit C, DNA evidence from 3 individuals, matched against trace samples obtained legally from the president's prior medical records submitted during the 2020 campaign. The match probability, 99.6% for all 3. Now Trump looked up, not with shock, with calculation. A flicker of the old performer emerged. The man who lived on camera, fed on attention. He opened his mouth, and Jasmine cut him off. "I'm not finished." A beat. The entire chamber held its breath. Trump's mouth tightened, closing slowly like a trap resetting. Jasmine pulled out 3 sealed envelopes, unmarked. She placed them down, side by side, deliberate. Then, without speaking, she slid the center one directly toward Trump. He didn't touch it. She didn't blink. Each contains the verified birth certificate of one individual, she said. 3 different mothers, 3 different states, 3 lives shaped by silence, and one father whose name appears on none of them. Trump leaned back slightly, but his hands gripped the arms of the chair now, white-knuckled. Then Jasmine leaned in, her voice dropping, not louder but deeper, quieter, more dangerous. And yet, over 86 million has been funneled to those mothers over 2 decades, through shell companies, offshore accounts, and massed charitable grants. Mr. President, this isn't about private life. This is about abuse of public trust. This is about power used to erase people, your people. Still, he said nothing, but his breathing had changed. The room was still as a cathedral. Jasmine slowly closed the file, not to hide, to end the opening act. She folded her hands, looked him square in the eye. Do you deny being their father? For the first time in his career, Donald Trump looked cornered. And for the first time in hers, Jasmine Crockett knew. The silence was finally louder than the man himself. For a long, heavy second, the only sound in the chamber was the low mechanical hum of a camera adjusting focus. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loud. Jasmine had just laid the trap, not with emotion, not with force, but with control, precision, proof. There was nowhere for him to go but inward. And yet, this was Donald J. Trump. He'd never been one to take a punch without throwing a grenade in return. He shifted in his chair, slightly forward, elbows on the table, fingertips touching, knuckles pale, a practiced posture. A pose he'd perfected over 5 decades of boardrooms, courtrooms, and campaign stages. But there was something new behind the stillness today. Not fear, not guilt, something older, meaner, something that thrived not on defense but on spectacle. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't ask permission. He just spoke. This entire hearing, he began, voice low and sharp like the draw of a blade across silk, is a joke. The room stirred. He turned his gaze slowly, deliberately toward the committee dais, and then to the packed gallery behind them. He wanted them watching. He needed them watching. It's a setup, a media circus, cooked up by bitter people, he said, letting the word bitter twist with disdain. People who've spent their entire careers doing absolutely nothing, except trying to destroy mine. He paused, not because he needed to, but because he knew how to work the silence. He always had. And you? He turned fully to face Jasmine now, jabbing a thick, tanned finger toward her, are the ringmaster of this pathetic little circus. The air cracked, gasps broke out in waves, cameras jerked into motion. A photographer dropped his lens cap. The court stenographer's fingers froze for a half beat before hammering faster to catch up. Chairwoman Hernandez blinked, stunned. Trump had just violated protocol, insulted a sitting congresswoman on record, and accused an entire oversight committee of corruption. And they weren't even 5 minutes in. But Jasmine? She didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, head slightly tilted, watching him the way a lioness watches prey that hasn't yet realized it's already wounded. Her fingers curled gently under the folder again, not to reopen it, but to remind him she still had more. Trump smirked, emboldened by her silence. He leaned further forward now, shifting from president to performer. You see, they can't beat me at the ballot box, so they try to beat me here, with fake documents, fake evidence, fake hearings, he continued, his voice rising just enough to ignite the press gallery. They've thrown Russia at me, Ukraine, taxes, porn stars, and now babies? Really? That's your big finale? A sad little file of lies and long-forgotten flings from the 90s? He laughed. It was hollow, loud. It bounced off the chamber walls like the echo of a man pretending confidence at the edge of the cliff. Let me ask you something, he sneered. Where's the crime? Where's the fraud? Do you think being a man, a real man, is some kind of scandal now? There was no response from the dais, not yet. He turned back to the cameras. To the American people watching this, he said, voice booming now, arms wide like a preacher mid-sermon, Don't let them distract you. While they dig up ancient gossip, I'm rebuilding your military, reclaiming your borders, reviving your economy. He looked down at the folder in front of Jasmine with open contempt. And if I made mistakes 25 years ago, guess what? So did you. So did she. So did everyone in this damn room. But only I get dragged through a national circus for it. He sat back, breathing hard. The silence returned, but now it was different, sharper. It vibrated at a higher frequency, like the charge in the air before lightning strikes. Jasmine didn't look at the folder. She didn't blink at the cameras. She looked directly at him. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, unrushed, measured. It didn't need to rise. It was the kind of voice that only sounds calm when it knows something you don't. Are you finished, Mr. President? The question wasn't a challenge, it was a warning, a red line drawn in silk. Trump didn't answer. Jasmine leaned in, just enough for only him to hear. Because if that was your opening act, she said softly, you're going to hate the next 439 exhibits. She sat back, poised, unmoved. The room swelled again with tension, but it was a different kind now. Not shock, not outrage, anticipation. Everyone knew what had just happened. Donald Trump had tried to hijack the narrative. He threw fire and expected chaos. Instead, he found silence, deadly, disciplined, Jasmine Crockett's silence. And that terrified him more than anything she'd said. Because even he knew that smile. That was the calm before the bloodline broke wide open. The room hadn't fully settled from Trump's theatrics when Jasmine lifted her hand and turned the page in the folder. It was a simple gesture, almost quiet, but the weight of it cracked through the chamber louder than his entire tirade. One page, white, clean, centered. A single government-issued document slid into view beneath her palm, its inked seal glinting under the fluorescent lights. This, she said, her voice steady, almost soft, the kind of softness that's sharper than a knife, is the beginning. The chamber hushed. Not a single cough, not a whisper from the rows of aides, press, or elected officials. Just the low hum of power trembling in anticipation. Jasmine lifted the document between two fingers and held it up, slowly turning it to face the committee. A certified copy of a Canadian birth certificate, she said, registered on April 3, 1998 in Toronto General Hospital. The mother, Colleen Marks, a U.S. citizen, formerly employed by the Miss Universe organization. Her gaze flicked sideways, just briefly, and the implication hung in the air like smoke. She set the page down with care, flattening it out with the edge of her palm. The father section, she continued, tapping the space just below the child's name, is listed as not disclosed. Trump's eyes hadn't moved from the page, but something in his posture shifted. A muscle in his cheek twitched. Jasmine saw it. Everyone saw it. The mother never filed for child support, Jasmine said, her voice cooling further. Never spoke to press. No lawsuits, no claims. Not once. For 27 years, she raised her child alone, in silence. Until a private investigator hired by this committee found a matching DNA sequence in a sealed paternity registry, entered anonymously by the mother in 2003. She reached beneath the folder and produced a second page, denser with blocks of genetic code highlighted. She didn't need to read it. The single line at the bottom was enough. Paternity match probability, 99.12. The document made its way down the table, passed from hand to hand until it reached Trump's attorneys. None of them touched it. It just sat there, an accusation printed in black and white, quiet as a loaded gun. The room began to murmur. First the press box, whispers, taps on tablets, phones vibrating with live headlines. Then the committee members. Even Chairwoman Hernandez leaned forward, eyebrows tightening, and still, Trump said nothing. 3 seconds passed. Then he laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't amused. It was a brittle, hollow sound, too sharp to be genuine and too short to feel human. I was in New York, he said, leaning back in his chair, arms folding casually across his chest. All of 1998. I never left the country. Nice try. Jasmine didn't blink. So you're saying you never traveled to Toronto, not even once, during that year? I didn't need to, he shot back. Everything I needed was in Manhattan. Business, media, family. I had a newborn son that year. Barron, ask Melania. There it was, the pivot, the redirect, the confident wave of the hand that had derailed so many other inquiries in the past. But it didn't land this time, because Jasmine was already flipping to the next page. The Trump Organization Private Flight Manifest, December 1997, she said. Filed with the FAA, one Gulfstream 4 departing Teterboro, New Jersey, en route to Toronto Pearson International Airport. On board Donald J. Trump, Colleen Marks, two unnamed aides, and one pageant consultant. Trump didn't smile now. His jaw worked soundlessly. His lawyers leaned in, whispering with growing urgency. Jasmine didn't look up. Her voice remained calm, almost polite. You spent 31 hours in Toronto, checked into the King Edward Hotel under an alias, one we've seen you use before in depositions, including the Cohen testimony in 2018. John Barron, familiar name, I believe? The room erupted in quiet gasps again. Reporters scribbled. One aide clutched her phone so tight the screen cracked. Trump's hands moved now. Not to argue, not to gesture, but to grip the table's edge, as if anchoring himself to something solid. But the ground beneath him had already shifted. Mr. President, Jasmine continued, her tone cool as polished glass, you are entitled to deny paternity. You are not entitled to rewrite flight logs, delete public records, or erase DNA. Still, he said nothing. So she spoke to the room. This child, she said, lifting the certificate again, was born into silence, paid for by shame, and erased by power. Today that ends. Her eyes locked on Trump's again, and this time he looked away, just for a second. But in politics, in war, that's all it takes to know the first door had opened. And behind it, the truth had already stepped through. The birth certificate sat like a landmine on the table. Silent, inert, but radiating the threat of everything it carried. Trump had laughed it off, had spun another performance, had called it coincidence, bad memory, media spin. But Jasmine hadn't closed the folder. She had simply paused. Her fingers now moved toward a small black remote at the edge of her papers. Unremarkable to the eye, but suddenly magnetic to every gaze in the room. She didn't speak as she picked it up. She didn't warn anyone. She didn't need to. Her silence was permission enough. With a single click, the chamber lights dimmed. A low, mechanical whir rose as the screen on the far wall flickered to life. Grainy, yellowish, unmistakably analog. The timestamp in the corner read 06/17/1997, 4:42 p.m. The footage looked like it had slept for decades inside a forgotten box. And in a way, it had. The angle was fixed. From a high, static perch, maybe a security camera mounted under a roof eave. The lens was trained on a stretch of lush green bordering a golf course in Palm Beach. Summer sun poured gold over manicured hedges and white stucco walls. At first, the frame was still. Birds fluttered. Palm trees swayed. Then, a golf cart entered the frame. In it, a man in a white polo shirt, tan slacks, signature sweep of golden blonde hair. He stepped off the cart, tall and familiar. Too familiar. There was no mistaking him. Donald J. Trump. He was younger, but not unrecognizable. Still broad-shouldered, still smug. The camera caught the subtle flare of his posture, the performative gait. He always walked like he expected to be watched. Walking beside him, holding his arm, was a woman with long auburn hair. Colleen Marks. She was laughing. So was he. They didn't head toward the clubhouse, not toward the lobby. They bypassed it completely, stepping off the path toward a side gate. The security badge hung from Trump's pocket glinted once in the sun before disappearing into the shadowed entrance of what was unmistakably a private villa. The door opened. He let her in first, then followed. The door closed behind them. The video stopped. No sound, no commentary, no embellishment, just silence again. This time heavier. Not a silence of tension, but of revelation. Something irreversible had been shown. Trump didn't move. Jasmine broke the stillness with a voice low and sharp. Palm Beach Country Club, she said. Security archives, retrieved from magnetic tape in 2021 after the property changed ownership. Preserved, time-stamped, verified. She set the remote down like a gavel. You said you were in New York all of 1998, but you were in Toronto in December 1997, and you were in Florida with Miss Marks in June. Trump's jaw clenched visibly now. His eyes hadn't left the screen, even though it had gone black, perhaps hoping it would turn back on or disappear. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, the blade of her voice now unsheathed. You said this child, your alleged child, was fiction, that the documents were fake, that the timeline was impossible. She gestured to the monitor. So tell us, Mr. President, what exactly were you doing at a private villa with Ms. Marks, 3 weeks after she left your employment and 1 year before her child was born? Still nothing, but the silence no longer protected him. One of the committee members shifted uncomfortably. Another whispered something to an aide who began typing furiously. Chairwoman Hernandez watched like a hawk, lips pressed into a single unbroken line. Trump finally inhaled, a tight, shallow draw of breath, like a man trying to stay afloat while sinking beneath ice. When he spoke, his voice was low and slower than before, calculated but missing the spark it had carried just minutes ago. That proves nothing, he said. That's a golf game. That's a meeting. A hello. I've been filmed with thousands of people, hundreds of women. That doesn't mean anything. He tried to shrug, but the gesture was off, rigid, defensive. It means you lied, Jasmine replied, no longer masking the steel behind her words. It means you denied ever being there. You denied ever seeing her again. And now we have you, not alleged, not rumored, but documented, with her on a day and time that places you in her presence, contradicting your sworn statement submitted to this very committee just 6 days ago. A murmur pulsed across the gallery. A few gasps, one audible, Jesus Christ. But Jasmine wasn't finished. And let's be honest, she said, eyes locking onto his, unblinking, unwavering. If this were just a hello, Mr. President, why did the next 10 years of Mrs. Marks's life involve monthly wire transfers, an NDA buried under corporate legal shells, and a child with DNA that matches yours with 99.6% certainty? Trump opened his mouth, closed it again. His lawyer shifted, frantically flipping papers now, but finding no foothold. For the first time, he looked not like a president, not like a businessman, not even like a man cornered, but like a man caught in the middle of a house he'd built, now watching it burn room by room. Jasmine leaned back, calm again. Ice returned to her shoulders, her hands folded neatly on the table. One door opened, she said, almost gently, and behind it, the truth walked in with its own videotape. And now, for the first time all morning, the President of the United States didn't have a single word left to throw. For 5 seconds, the chamber held that breathless stillness, the kind that usually follows impact, like the echo after a punch that lands clean to the jaw. Jasmine sat back, composed, the image of lethal composure. The screen was black again. The exhibits sat in full view, and the press pool was vibrating with the electricity of a narrative too big to ignore. Then Trump moved. It was subtle at first. A tilt of the chin, a twitch in his cheek, the tightening of one hand on the table. But it was coming, like thunder beneath marble. And when it broke, it wasn't words, it was fire. He slammed his open palm flat against the table, the sound ricocheting through the hearing room like a gunshot. Aides jumped. A security officer shifted forward instinctively. Jasmine didn't move. This is disgusting, he snapped, his voice hoarse and loud, cracking slightly under the weight of forced control. This isn't a hearing, it's a hit job, a setup, a dirty, sleazy smear campaign dressed up in folders and microphones. The room recoiled, not from the volume, but from the desperation leaking beneath it. Trump stood up halfway, bracing himself on the table, looming forward. He was red now, his face flushed with rage, eyes narrowed into slits as he glared directly at Jasmine. You're using these women, he spat. That's what this is. You're taking weak, lost, confused women and turning them into props. Political weapons. Why? Because you hate me. Because you couldn't beat me in the emotion, So now you're trying to shame me out of office in front of a camera. Jasmine raised one eyebrow slightly. The calm in her face only enraged him more. You want to paint me as some monster, as some predator, just because I've lived a bigger life than any of you could imagine, he growled. You dig up people I met 25 years ago, 25, and expect me to remember every assistant, every handshake, every hello. A beat. His hand was still shaking. I've built towers, he barked. I've rebuilt an economy. I've stared down dictators. And now I'm supposed to apologize because some woman I barely remember had a baby and wants a headline? There it was, the pivot, the classic strategy, deny, belittle, then shift blame. But this time the tone had shifted. The performance didn't hold like it used to. The lines weren't landing. Because behind him on every screen in America, that grainy video clip was looping. And that woman wasn't looking for a headline. She had asked for nothing. She had kept silent for decades. Until now. Jasmine's expression didn't change. But the chamber did. He pushed on. I don't owe anyone anything, he barked, almost shouting now. Not unless God himself hands me a certificate that says Father in gold ink and signs it with a halo. That line hung awkwardly in the air. It was meant to provoke laughter, deflection, mockery. No one laughed. He looked around, eyes darting from face to face, expecting someone, anyone, to validate the theater he had just staged. No one moved. So Jasmine spoke, her voice still low, still deliberate, cut through the tension like a needle through silk. Mr. President, she said, no one here asked you to apologize. He turned to her sharply. We asked you to stop lying. That stopped him. For half a second, his expression froze, not in confusion, but in recognition. Like a man who suddenly realizes the crowd isn't laughing anymore. Jasmine continued, her words like tempered glass, sharp, reflective, and impossible to look away from. You say these women are weak, she said, but they didn't come to us. We found them. They didn't seek cameras. They sought survival. You think they're confused? They remember everything. They remember the lays, the envelopes, the silence. They remember carrying your secrets while you built a golden empire on top of their erased lives. Trump opened his mouth, but she didn't give him the space. And you say you've built towers? So did pharaohs. So did tyrants. That doesn't make you holy. It just means you had enough money to ignore the rubble beneath your feet. Now her tone changed, just slightly. It didn't rise, but it deepened. And with it came weight, history, purpose. You have a child out there with Mr. President. She's not asking for your love. She's not even asking for your name. She's asking for truth. Because truth doesn't care how many buildings you put your name on. It only cares how many you buried it under. The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't Trump's silence they noticed. It was the stillness of reckoning. A slow, creeping awareness that whatever came next, the second door, the second woman, the second life silenced, would only make this truth harder to bury. Jasmine closed the file, not because she was done, but because the real storm hadn't even started. She let the silence breathe again, let it stretch long enough for everyone in the room to start wondering, what else could possibly be left? What card hadn't been played yet? The first child had stunned the chamber. The tape had peeled back denial. The president's outburst had turned fury into a smokescreen. Now it was Jasmine's turn to ignite what came next. She looked down the dais, then back at Trump, calm, precise, almost gentle in tone, as if this next truth didn't need dramatics, only clarity. Mr. President, she said evenly, you claim to know nothing of the first child. You denied the second. We'll get to her shortly. But there's a third. Her eyes didn't leave his. And unlike the others, she's not hidden. She's not forgotten. She's already here. She paused just long enough for confusion to stir. First in Trump's expression, then in the room itself. Her name, Jasmine said, each syllable deliberate now, is Alexandria Rowan. It hit the room like an audible earthquake. There was no warning, no buildup. Just the name, dropped like a verdict, reverberating through the chamber and into every open notebook, every reporter's live stream, Every corner of the political internet that was now exploding without mercy. Gasps rippled. One senator's pen fell to the floor with a hard clatter. Aides looked at each other in disbelief. Someone from the gallery whispered, too loud to be unnoticed, "She's a congresswoman." Jasmine nodded once. "She is. Congresswoman Alexandria Rowan, Democrat from California's 14th District, elected in 2022, Committee on Science and Technology, climate reform advocate, Harvard graduate, and," she added, letting it land like a gavel, "biologically, the daughter of the sitting president of the United States." All eyes darted to Trump. His face, once red with fire, had gone pale beneath the overhead light. He didn't blink. He didn't deny it. Not yet. He just stared, not at Jasmine, not at the committee, but at the door behind her, because it had begun to open. It was a simple door. Oak, institutional, set behind the witness table. It opened inward with a soft, almost reverent creak, and through it stepped a woman the entire room already knew, or thought they did. Alexandria Rowan. She walked with purpose, not rushed, not tentative. Her heels struck the marble floor like punctuation marks. Black suit, simple blouse, no jewelry save for a silver pin shaped like a gavel on her lapel. Her hair was tied back tight, face unreadable. But her presence alone reordered the room's gravity. This wasn't just a twist. It was a tectonic shift. No one spoke, not even Jasmine. Alexandria stopped at the end of the table, nodded once to the chairwoman, then turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the man at the center of it all. She met Trump's eyes with a calm that was centuries old. And for the first time that morning, it wasn't Jasmine who froze the president. It was her. Trump's lips parted slightly, like he might speak, but no words came. Recognition was there, too faint for cameras, but clear enough for anyone looking close. A flash of memory, of something he thought buried too deep to matter, of a moment that had grown roots and come back in the shape of a woman who now stood taller than him. Jasmine broke the silence with a single sentence. She asked to testify in person. A low murmur passed through the room like wind through dry grass. Chairwoman Hernandez gave a nod. The seat beside Jasmine was pulled out. Alexandria sat, not like someone being summoned, not like someone broken or unsure. She sat like someone returning to a battlefield she had walked away from once, and now knew exactly how to win. Jasmine turned to her, not with instruction, but respect. "Congresswoman Rowan," she said quietly, "the floor is yours." Alexandria leaned forward, fingers laced, her voice low, smooth, and unflinching. "I was born on March 18th, 1991, she began. "I've lived 34 years without knowing who my father really was. Or rather, I always knew. I was just told not to say it out loud." Trump shifted in his seat. It was the first time he'd moved since the door opened. "My mother," she continued, "was an environmental aide at the Miss Universe pageant in 1990. She signed an NDA, which expired 3 years ago. She raised me alone. No media, no lawsuits, no claims. She didn't want his money. She just wanted peace. But silence has a cost. And I'm done paying it." She turned now, not just to Trump, but to the entire chamber. "I didn't come here for vengeance. I came here to end the mythology. That power means freedom from consequence. That men like him can shape nations while ghosting their own children. That the story belongs to them." Another pause. She let the silence do its work. Let it become part of the testimony. Then softer now, but no less firm, "I didn't inherit his name, but I inherited everything he left behind. And now he'll have to live with that." She folded her hands again. Silence followed, not of shock this time, but of reckoning. And in that moment, the man who had commanded rooms for decades suddenly looked very, very small. Alexandria didn't look down at her notes. She didn't need to. The story she was about to tell had been memorized, not by study, but by survival. She turned her gaze fully to him now, not to the committee, not to the gallery, not even to Jasmine, only to the man who had given her half his DNA and nothing else. "You know who I am," she said, calm as a storm gathering. "You've always known, you just chose not to look." The words didn't land like accusations. They landed like truths already known, but never dared spoken aloud. They didn't cut. They revealed. Trump's jaw tensed, his eyes narrowing, but still he said nothing. His silence, so often a strategy, had begun to feel like surrender. My mother, Alexandria continued, was paid to stay invisible. The first check came 2 months after I was born. There was no return address, just a signature. Her attorney said it was a gift of goodwill. She understood what it meant. She cashed it anyway, because she had hospital bills and rent and no one to lean on. She paused just briefly, but not to collect herself, to let the reality sink in. The checks came every month. No contact, no calls, no name in the memo line, just silence. Bought silence. And she honored that silence for 34 years, because she was proud, because she wanted to protect me. But she shouldn't have had to. Her voice wavered for a moment, not in weakness, but in memory. I remember asking about my father when I was 8. She said, "He's someone important." That was the only time I saw her cry without making a sound. I remember thinking I must have done something wrong, because he never came back, because I wasn't enough to make him stay. That hit the room like thunder muffled by velvet. Trump's knuckles were white now. His hand gripped the table like he needed to hold something real. But the only thing he could hold was a truth that had grown legs and walked into the room wearing heels. I grew up with good grades, scholarships, ambition, Alexandria went on, but also with shame. Not the kind you inherit, the kind you absorb. The kind that comes from every school form left blank under father. The kind that comes from not knowing whether you were a secret, a mistake, or just something inconvenient. She looked at Trump again, not with anger, with clarity. I watched you rise on TV. I watched your name go up in gold. I watched you run for president and win. And still I stayed silent. I had no interest in your power. I just wanted peace. But peace isn't what you build, is it? Trump shifted in his seat and then suddenly slammed his hand down on the table with a thud so loud it broke through every frozen breath in the chamber. "This is a setup," he barked. "You're nothing but a mouthpiece. You weren't there. You don't know what happened. I never met your mother in my life." His voice boomed, but it cracked at the edge. And the crack was what everyone heard. It wasn't fury, it was fear pretending to be fury. Alexandria didn't flinch. Her hands never moved. "My mother," she said quietly, "still has the dress she wore the night you asked her to stay behind after the event. She kept it in a vacuum-sealed bag. Not because she worshipped you, but because she knew someday someone would ask if she made it all up." She opened her purse and pulled out a plastic envelope, sliding it across the table toward the evidence clerk. Inside was a photograph, old and faded, but unmistakable. Her mother, in a red satin dress, standing beside a younger Donald Trump, his hand on her waist, his face turned toward the camera like he always knew exactly where it was. "I'm not here to take your name. I don't need your money. I don't even need your acknowledgement," Alexandria said. "But I do need the world to understand what it means when men like you build empires on omission, what it costs to be erased." Trump looked at the photo, then up at her, but whatever fire had once lived in his eyes was flickering now, thinned by exposure, by time, by truth. And then Jasmine, who had said nothing through the entire testimony, finally spoke again. "Congresswoman Rowan," she said, her voice steady, "are you willing to submit this testimony and evidence under oath?" Alexandria turned, calm as ever. "I already have," she said, "and I'm not done yet." Jasmine nodded once, the faintest smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. And for the first time all day, Donald Trump looked not angry, but afraid. He felt it, not just in the evidence laid bare or the witnesses he didn't expect. He felt it in the silence, in the shifting weight of a room that no longer leaned toward him. For decades, he had lived in noise, in applause, in headlines, in spectacle. But this silence, this was not empty. It was judgment coiled like a spring. He couldn't hold it. He snapped. "You're unfit, idiot!" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage, sending a physical jolt through the chamber. "This is a show trial run by a failed lawyer pretending to be God. You sit there with your little folder, acting like you're Moses coming down the mountain." The outburst ricocheted across the hearing room like shrapnel. Reporters jerked upright. A gavel banged once, twice, but no one was really listening anymore. All eyes were locked on him. The president, now red-faced, sweating, shaking slightly as his anger tore free from whatever leash had held it. Trump pointed at Jasmine now, fingers stabbing the air like a dagger that never landed. You think you're brave? Please, you're a leech, clinging to scandals and bloodlines because you'll never have your own legacy. You think shouting truth gives you credibility? All it makes you is loud. The rage was raw, unfiltered, and yet somehow entirely performative. He had yelled before, in debates, in rallies, even in courtrooms, but this was different. This was desperate, as if he thought if he could just scream loud enough, the timeline might erase itself. Only losers cling to blood to make themselves famous, he spat. Only cowards need last names to get first chances. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't sit back. She stood, slowly, gracefully. A stillness so complete it quieted the room more than any gavel could. The sound of her chair easing back was somehow louder than the president's scream. And when she spoke, her voice didn't rise. It descended, soft, even, but so sharp it cut like ice pressed to the spine. I cling to the truth, Mr. President. She took one step forward, the same truth you've abandoned, not once, not twice, but 3 times. The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't raise her voice because she didn't need to. Power doesn't shout, it knows its weight. 3 children, 3 women, 3 sets of sealed payments and erased names. You didn't forget them, Mr. President. You removed them, like stains you couldn't wash out of a brand. Trump's mouth opened again, but no words came. Just breath, just heat. Jasmine continued, and now you stand here, not outraged at the accusations, but outraged that they were brought into the light, that the shadows you built around yourself cracked just enough for someone to look in. She turned slightly, looking toward the gallery now, not at Trump, at the country. This isn't about shame, it's about pattern. It's about power. It's about what happens when a man with unchecked privilege decides some lives don't count because they weren't convenient. Cameras snapped. Pens flew across paper. Aides leaned to whisper, breathless, as if trying to keep up with history as it unfolded in real time. But Jasmine didn't stop. They didn't ask for his name. They didn't beg for inheritance. They simply wanted to be real. And the cost of their reality was silence. Paid silence. Legal silence. Fearful silence. She turned back to Trump now, her gaze neither cruel nor triumphant. Just certain. You call me unfit, but I didn't create this story. I just refused to bury it. And for a full 5 seconds, the room remained frozen. Trump's lips parted as if to speak again, but all that came was the faint exhale of a man who had run out of places to hide. Chairwoman Hernandez looked from Jasmine to Trump, then leaned slightly into her mic. Mr. President, she said, if you have a formal response, the floor is yours. But he didn't move, and Jasmine, she didn't sit back down, because something had shifted permanently. The chamber knew it, the press knew it, and for the first time, so did he. The performance had ended. The echo chamber had collapsed, and all that was left now was truth. But truth, as always, wasn't the end of the story. Not in Washington, not in politics, not in a world that measured honesty in headlines and loyalty in likes. Donald Trump sat in silence for a beat too long, the kind that usually marks surrender. His knuckles relaxed against the table, his gaze drifting somewhere between the cameras and the gallery. Not broken, but recalibrating. Then slowly, methodically, he turned his chair just a few degrees to the left, facing the press. And the moment his eyes met the lens, something in his expression shifted. The flush in his face drained into solemnity. The rage became restraint. And the practiced cadence of a man who had survived 10,000 microphones returned with eerie precision. I was misled, he said, voice quieter now. Almost human. I was lied to. The reporters leaned in. I was extorted, he continued, told to keep my mouth shut or see my reputation destroyed. I've spent the last 30 years trying to protect my family, my company, and yes, even the women who wanted to stay out of the spotlight. He glanced toward the committee, toward Jasmine, toward Alexandria, but never fully addressed them. They weren't the audience now. America was. This is what I get, he said, spreading his palms in mock surrender. This is the cost of compassion, of giving people a second chance, of paying quietly so no one else had to suffer the shame of public scrutiny. And just like that, the pivot landed. The story began to twist. In the press gallery, some reporters froze, caught between disillusion and instinct. Others whispered to their producers, adjusting headlines mid-sentence. Trump breaks silence, one muttered. Claims betrayal. A Fox anchor leaned forward in her seat, already mouthing the words, "This may actually help him." Trump saw it happening in real time. The recalibration of narrative, and he leaned in harder. "You call it hush money," he said. "I called it mercy. You call it hiding. I called it dignity. I could have fought. I could have taken them to court. I didn't. I let them live their lives. I gave them peace. And now I'm being punished for not dragging them through the mud 20 years ago." He shook his head slowly, convincingly, like a disappointed father rather than an indicted man. "This hearing isn't about truth," he said. "It's about vengeance. It's about humiliation. It's about tearing down everything I've built by weaponizing human mistakes, ones I made in private, long before I was ever in office." And then he delivered the line he'd been building toward, polished in his mind 100 times. "I'm not denying the past. I'm paying the price of mercy." Silence. But this time it wasn't on his terms. The room held its breath, not in awe, but in uncertainty. The fault lines had shifted, not because anyone believed him completely, but because he'd changed the shape of the argument, from a courtroom to a stage, from facts to feelings, and feelings were dangerously malleable. Jasmine watched, still standing, but no longer speaking, not because she was defeated, far from it, but because she understood the game. He had no more defense, so he would write a different story. He would become the wronged one, the martyr, the misunderstood patriarch. And in some living room, somewhere, someone was already nodding in sympathy, already saying they're doing it to him again. Alexandria's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak either. She had grown up in the shadow of the kind of charm that bent truth like heat bends light. She knew how it felt to be erased, and how quickly the world could forgive the eraser if the lighting was just right. Chairwoman Hernandez finally leaned forward, breaking the spell. "Mr. President," she said, dry but sharp, "are you claiming you knew of these children but kept them quiet out of compassion?" Trump turned slightly, the mask already slipping back into place. "I'm saying," he replied, "that I made decisions with the intent to protect people, and now they're using those decisions to destroy me." He gestured broadly toward the folder, the exhibits, even Alexandria. "I loved, maybe foolishly. I helped, maybe too generously, but I never abandoned anyone." Gasps, murmurs, scribbles. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her voice still withheld, as if choosing when and how to dismantle the illusion. Because that was the trap now. He had flipped the conversation from silence to sacrifice, from power to pain, and the country, hungry for redemption arcs and clean explanations, might just believe him. But Jasmine knew something else. Truth didn't care who sounded more human. It just waited for the next piece of evidence, and she had 2 more doors left to open. She didn't rise this time. She didn't need a speech. The room was already waiting, not for a rebuttal, but for the kind of weight that crushes pretense. She reached down, flipped to a tab inside the folder labeled EX, 7C, Financial Disbursements, and slid out a stack of neatly clipped pages. She held them up with a quiet sort of reverence, as if handling not paper but confession. "Let the record show," she said evenly, "that these are financial statements detailing 3 separate payment pipelines from corporations affiliated with the Trump Organization." She passed the stack to the clerk, who began distributing copies down the committee bench. The air shifted again, not with tension, but with dread. The kind of dread that lives inside paperwork, where lies lose their camouflage. "These payments were processed over the course of 23 years, Jasmine continued. They were made through entities registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, each obscured behind layers of shell companies with names like Crownstone Holdings and Elk Ridge Capital." She tapped the document as she spoke. Each of those companies had one common directive: funnel quarterly payments in the amounts of $22,000, $27,500, and $36,000. to 3 individuals, each listed under a different alias in 3 different states. Trump leaned back now, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes flicked across the room with surgical calculation. No more outbursts. He knew that yelling wouldn't stop numbers. Numbers couldn't be drowned out. "And who signed these disbursements?" Jasmine asked aloud, even though she already knew the answer. "We traced them. Every authorization, every ledger note, every internal email. But we also found someone who remembered. Someone who wasn't hidden." She turned slightly, just enough for the cameras to pivot with her, and gestured to a man sitting patiently near the witness bench. A graying man in a dark suit with trembling fingers clasped together in his lap. He stood when called. Not proud, not afraid, just tired and ready. "Please state your name and position for the record," Chairwoman Hernandez said. He cleared his throat. "My name is David Kessler," he said. "I was senior financial controller for Trump Global Assets from 1996 to 2019. Murmurs erupted. That name had appeared before, quietly in footnotes, always elusive. But now here he was, in the flesh. Jasmine gave a nod. "Mr. Kessler," she said, "did you personally authorize or process payments through Crownstone Holdings?" "Yes." "To beneficiaries under the names Melissa Crane, Jane D., and Olivia Hart?" "Yes." "Were those real names?" "No," he said. "They were placeholders. We used a code system, but I know exactly who they referred to." Jasmine took a step forward. "And were these payments tied to non-disclosure agreements and silent financial arrangements related to alleged paternity cases?" Kessler hesitated. Then, yes. Another shift in the room, this one tectonic. The wall of deniability cracked. Trump finally moved. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. He was a mid-level controller. He didn't know where half the money was going. "I had thousands of employees. I never signed anything like that personally." Jasmine turned her eyes to Kessler. Her voice softened, but the steel beneath it didn't. "Did the president sign any of these authorizations?" Kessler looked directly at Trump now. His voice didn't tremble. "I have his initials on 72 of them," he said. "Sometimes full signatures, other times just DT. He used that a lot. Quick, messy. But I was the one who logged them. I was the one who coded them. I filed them. I was told to." The room cracked wide open. Trump opened his mouth again, but the weight of it all hit faster than he could form words. Kessler stepped closer, suddenly not a number cruncher, not a quiet accountant, but the bearer of memory, of receipts, of guilt finally dropped like bricks on marble. "I signed for you," he said, loud enough now for the back of the room to hear. "And I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending your silence wasn't engineered, tired of watching other men take the fall while you moved on untouched." Gasps swept across the gallery. Reporters scrambled to verify, heads buried in phones, analysts already cutting to breaking news alerts. Trump sat frozen, face blank, the color draining slowly from him like ink bleeding from old paper. Jasmine stepped back, folding her hands again. No more myth, no more spin, just numbers, and a man who finally decided to stop carrying the lie. She didn't say checkmate. She didn't need to. Because the paper trail had done what no camera, no protest, no headline ever could. It brought the empire back to dust. For the first time since the hearing began, Donald Trump had no hands left to play. His voice, once so practiced, had cracked. His defenses, emotional, legal, strategic, had fallen like brittle scaffolding beneath a collapsing tower of wealth and myth. The weight of numbers, witnesses, memories, in blood had pressed in from every direction, and there was nowhere left to pivot. But men like him don't retreat. They gamble. He slammed his hand down again, not in rage this time, but with purpose, as if summoning a final act that would turn the tide one last time. "Enough," he barked, rising to his feet, his voice trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion hidden behind performance. "You want to talk DNA?" He turned, scanning the press, the cameras, the committee. "Fine, let's talk DNA." The chamber hushed. Every pair of eyes locked on him, waiting for whatever twist he thought could still save him. "I'm ready to be tested," he declared, chest out, jaw tight. "Right here, right now, let's swab. Let's run the test. Let's end the witch hunt." His voice was louder now, bolder, as if defiance alone could resurrect credibility. "You think you've got something? Do it. I've got nothing to hide." He was trying to seize the room again, trying to turn prosecution into provocation. The move was classic, dramatic, performative, full of martyrdom. Headlines would eat it up. Supporters would lap it down. The silence that followed was thick with fire. Then Jasmine smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk. Just a slow, deliberate pull at the corners of her mouth, as if she'd just seen a trap spring shut exactly as planned. She looked up at the chairwoman, then back at Trump. "Mr. President," she said, her voice cool and precise, "we already did." He blinked. The room stiffened, confused. Jasmine continued, turning to the evidence clerk who handed her a small, clear bag. Inside, a plastic cup sealed and labeled with a timestamp and chain of custody signature. "You drank from this cup," she said, holding it aloft for the room to see, "in the private holding room downstairs. 37 minutes ago, we recovered it immediately after you left the room. Gloves, chain of custody, witnessed and logged." She tapped the side of the bag lightly, as if it were a ticking clock. "It was tested last night against the DNA samples we already had. We ran the confirmation this morning, during your initial testimony." Trump stared at the cup like it was radioactive. Jasmine didn't stop. "The result?" she said, turning to the committee. "A 99.6% paternity match to 3 individuals previously named, independently verified, witnessed, double-blind procedure. Lab reports have been submitted into evidence under Exhibits 11A through 11C. The explosion wasn't audible, but it was everywhere. Gasps, the stifled rush of breath across the room. Reporters hammering on their keyboards. One camera operator whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath as he refocused his shot. Trump's face shifted violently. A storm behind glass. Pale, then red, then blank. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, as if still trying to find the line that could undo the moment. But the thread had already snapped. "You can't do that," he muttered. But it didn't land, not with conviction, not even with confusion. Just instinct, the final twitch of a mechanism no longer connected to power. Jasmine looked him dead in the eye. "You asked for a test. We gave you one," she said. "And for once, Mr. President, the results weren't fake news, they were science." The room erupted again, not with noise, but with gravity. A slow shift, like an audience realizing the final act had ended not with a curtain, but with a confession. Chairwoman Hernandez leaned into her mic. "Let the record reflect that the president's voluntary sample confirms all previous DNA evidence. Congressional staff will ensure the findings are filed under sealed and public record simultaneously." Trump sank into his chair, shoulders heavy, face ashen. No more bluster, no more deflection, only the weight of reality settling into the bones of a man who had built entire empires on denial, and now found himself conquered by a single half-finished plastic cup. Jasmine sat down quietly. No gavel, no celebration, just the cold clarity of evidence doing what no war of words could, end the debate. And beyond the chamber walls, the country held its breath, waiting to decide whether this was the fall of a man or the moment he rose again by pretending he never did. Inside the hearing room, it was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask for applause because it already knows the truth has arrived. Trump sat sunken in his chair, his tie slightly askew, lips parted but mute, eyes darting nowhere. There was no fire left to throw, no magic trick left to pull. The DNA, the documents, the money trail, they had spoken. But no voice would carry more weight now than the one everyone had nearly forgotten in the storm. Hers. Alexandria Rowan reached for the microphone. She didn't rush, she didn't clear her throat. She simply lowered her hand, pressed the mic button, and began to speak with a voice that sounded nothing like a victim and everything like a verdict. "I don't need you to admit it," she said, her gaze fixed on Trump, but her words aimed at every corner of the chamber. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for your guilt, your apology, or even your name. She let it sit in the silence wrapped around her like armor. I've already won, she said, and this time her voice tightened just slightly, not in struggle but in steel. Because I'm standing here, in this chair, in this chamber, wearing a congressional pin I earned, not because of you, but in spite of you. The room stirred, a few heads lifted, a rustle of paper, a camera lens adjusted. Even Chairwoman Hernandez paused in her notes. Alexandria leaned forward. My mother raised me with what little she had. She raised me to never need a man to validate who I was. She never said your name, not once. And somehow I still knew exactly who you were, not from her stories, from the silence. Because silence tells you everything when it lasts long enough. She turned just slightly, not to Trump, but to the gallery. Her tone shifted again, softer now, reflective, almost maternal. There are thousands of kids out there like me. Kids raised without explanation, without acknowledgement, without closure. And they grow up thinking they were the ones who failed. But the truth is, the failure never belonged to us. Now she looked back at Trump, not with hatred, not with rage, just with clarity. You didn't destroy me. You defined yourself. And this, she gestured to the room, the microphones, the flashing lights, the brittle silence of a man undone. This isn't about paternity anymore. It's about accountability. She took a breath, the kind you take when a weight finally lifts. I don't need you to stand beside me, because I learned how to stand without you. That's how I know I've already won. The room erupted, not with chaos, not with frenzy, but with something far rarer in American politics: respect. A wave of applause rolled from the gallery like thunder made of gratitude. Some members of the press clapped. Even two committee members, one Democrat, one Republican, tapped the table gently, solemnly. A few staffers wiped their eyes. Jasmine didn't move. She only looked at Alexandria with the soft, wordless pride of someone who had simply held the door open long enough for someone else to walk through it. Trump said nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't scoff or shout or spin. He simply lowered his head, not in shame, in surrender. A man who had spent a lifetime shaping the narrative suddenly found himself no longer a character, but a caution. And in that stillness, Alexandria reached down, pressed the mic button off, and closed her folder. Not to erase what had been said, but to mark it as finished. And for the first time that day, the truth didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like freedom. But freedom, Jasmine knew, came with a price. And sometimes the moment you finally hold the truth in your hands is the same moment you realize how heavy it truly is. The hearing room had begun to shift, not physically, but atmospherically. The tension had drained, yes, but what replaced it wasn't peace. It was something colder, more uncertain, as if the air had adjusted to accommodate the weight of consequence, not yet felt but undeniably near. Alexandria had sat down, calm and unshaken. Trump hadn't moved in minutes. The entire committee remained silent, as if daring anyone to speak next would somehow unwrite what had already been written. Then Jasmine stood. No paper in hand, no evidence, no files, just her voice, raw, steady, and filled with something that could not be filed or fact-checked. She turned not to the committee, not to Trump, but to the camera, to the country, to every American still watching, still trying to make sense of the impossible. That the man sitting in the most powerful chair in the world had tried to silence the truth not with guns or laws, but with indifference. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. If we allow a man, she said slowly, to sit in the Oval Office after he's denied his own blood. She took one step closer to the mic, her eyes fixed dead into the lens, unblinking. Then we're not protecting democracy. Another breath. This one felt like a pause before a fall. We're betraying it. No gasps, no applause, just silence. The kind that only arrives when something sacred has been named aloud. And still, Jasmine didn't look away. This country wasn't built on perfection. It was built on accountability. And the moment we excuse abandonment, not of policy, but of people, we become complicit in a much deeper lie. The lie that power entitles you to erase whoever doesn't fit your narrative. Behind her, the flag stood still. The lights buzzed quietly above. She closed her eyes for just half a second. And when they opened, she said only this: "Let the record reflect. We all heard the truth today. The question now is, who's going to pretend they didn't?" She stepped back, no flourish, no grand exit, just the sound of her heels clicking once, twice, fading as she walked away from the microphone and down the center aisle of the hearing room, leaving a president, a Congress, and a nation behind her to decide what to do with what had just been unveiled. Trump never looked up, the chairwoman never adjourned, and no one moved, because it was over, and yet, somehow, only beginning, because there's something deeper than power, louder than applause, and more lasting than any name: the quiet truth between a parent and a child. No title is worth more than being there. No legacy is greater than showing up when it matters. Fame fades, headlines blur, but the absence of love leaves an echo that no empire can drown out. In the end, the world may remember what you built, but your child will remember whether you stayed. And that will always matter more. If this story stayed with you, don't rush past it. Sit with it, let it breathe, share it with someone who still believes that truth, even when uncomfortable, deserves to be heard. Not for outrage, but for reflection. This wasn't about politics. It was about presence, about the kind of love that doesn't need cameras, just courage, and about what's lost when we choose legacy over relationship, image over intimacy, silence over showing up. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real injustices and real courage. Any resemblance to actual events or people is coincidental, or intentional for the sake of public reflection. Because justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it takes the form of remembrance. This is Harrison Stories.